what I remember most about my school life is, well, I mean, in elementary school we would take like simple trips. Can't really remember too much of those. In middle school, we actually went to Hershey Park, like because I was in choir, and we did like music in the park, so that was always cool.
I went to the jungle many times.
I guess that my Florida trip for show choir my junior year would be one that really stands out to me. We went to Disney World, so that was a fun trip.
Nice. I remember it was in high school for my zoology class. They took us to a horse stud farm. It was probably one of the most traumatizing experiences of my life, I think.
We're going to the Inner Harbor for my senior trip in high school. It was in 2011. We went down there for the whole afternoon. We went on a boat ride, we did a cruise ship, we ate on the cruise, and we also went to a Baltimore Orioles game. The Baltimore Orioles played the Washington Nationals, which is my favorite team, and I remember everybody picking on me because I was the only Nationals fan out of all the Orioles fans, and they ended up winning at the Orioles Stadium that night, so I kind of had a nice victory there.
Well, I think that my favorite field trip would have to be the one to the aquarium, the Baltimore Aquarium. It was my favorite because they had these turtles and it was so cool, and I love the ocean and everything about it. I just can't swim, so that was out for me as a job.
If I were to choose something like another place to go, I don't know, someplace kind of close to home. I mean, do you guys go to Philadelphia? If so, that'd be interesting because that's got to be one of the most important parts of American history.
I had over 8 hours of documentary footage that I had to go through, and I decided there was a lot more footage than there was time for a film. So I broke the series up into mini episodes. So you're going to experience what we saw, what we heard by walking in our shoes. I want you to keep an open mind. Think outside the bus.
Anything fun for summer, huh? Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. I do hope to, procure a solid job, and I'm probably going to end up doing a lot of yard work in the process. Hopefully, we'll end up getting season passes to Hershey Park. That'll be awesome. Other than that, it's basically, take it one day at a time.
Yeah.
Well, I'm taking my SAT in June and I'm applying to Kutztown University. Other than that, I think I'm just really going to be working and saving up my money.
Nothing really. I don't, besides working and maybe retreating up to the mountains for a little bit and becoming a lumberjack. That's about it.
Hopefully I'm going to New Jersey, and then I start up my classes, but while I'm in New Jersey I'm going to see my little cousins, which will be always fun. They are 2 and 5, going on 5. So it'll be interesting, they'll be fun, and I'll get to spend some time with my aunt and my uncle. Hopefully go out to go to the farm that my aunt rides on and help with her horse. So it'll be a fun summer.
Doing history and psychology in Europe.
Like, why did you choose Havel and not Fennel or one of the other history professors?
Because I knew Terry, and I'd seen Terry in action, and he seemed to have a way with students that just seemed to me to be very similar to, I think, something that I liked. And Fennel, I just didn't know him as well, and I guess my assumption was that
he is the best history teacher.
That I thought Terry would be willing to do it. At the time I was single, and I said, let's do Europe. And we had these plans, and then we realized neither one of us had been to Europe. And after we laid it all out, Terry gave me the realization that he doesn't fly. So that kind of makes a trip to Europe a little bit out. And then Terry said, well, isn't there anything here in the United States? And I said, well, William James started in Boston. We could talk about Harvard. He's like, well, why don't we do that? I said, well, we could look at presidents and murderers. And he's like, well, let's do that. I said, how about biographies? And we just studied people, and then it just snowballed.
But for any instructor there that doesn't know what we know about taking students on trips.
They don't.
If they knew and they were dedicated instructors, they would jump at the chance.
They do
to
this in a second. They do it in a second.
And actually, it's one of our goals is to try to get more professors to want to develop and offer trips.
Yep.
George is our man. He will be sending you pictures. He'll be putting things up on Facebook. We are technologically... Grab your food here and then go sit at these picnic tables along here. I don't think anything's spilled.
Breast thighs, leg and neck.
I think it was safe.
Eight of them.
So, after an 8-hour or so drive on the road, we finally made it to Peabody, Massachusetts. We're staying at the Holiday Inn Hotel. It's nicer than the last 2 times we came. So, besides the traffic, we spent a little extra time on the road. Now we have to check in. So,
name, Sam Adams' name. It's all involved in this. And I think the best thing for us to do is to go into the visitor center, have a chance to look around. Sometimes people want to buy books or souvenirs there. They have a diorama in there to take a look at. But before we come back out and I talk about it, I want to just tell you, this is where the American Revolution started. And it was a good 14 months before the Declaration of Independence. So we're fighting the British before we declared independence. And a lot of people think that, oh, the war started against the British the day we declared independence. No, we declared independence a year and 2 months later as a way to rationalize why are we fighting our mother country. And so it started here. Again, the British are going to be coming, I believe it's right down this road here, but we'll get our bearings here. We came in backwards from where we came in last time, so I'm a little turned around here. But the British, no, I think they came in from this direction actually. But so they turned it that way, very good. The British came in, they didn't expect to see anybody here, but the militia was called out the night before. Because the militia had to wait all night, they ended up waiting in Buckman Tavern, which I believe is that yellow building right there. tavern. They waited all night in a tavern. So what are the American militia going to be doing while they're waiting for the British to arrive? Drinking. So they're drinking, and now it's not the Minute. You've heard of the Minutemen, right? You've all heard of the Minutemen. There were no Minutemen here, but believe me, after the Battle of Lexington was over, later that morning, about between about 5 and 6 in the morning, very early in the morning, right out here in the green, the Minutemen from throughout the countryside are going to show up, and they're going to harass the British once the British move from here 2 miles down the road to Concord. We're going to end up going to Concord, where the Americans have a great victory, and they really creamed the British later that day. But the British have a victory here, even though it wasn't supposed to be a fight. It was a very unfair fight, and there's a lot of interesting little tidbits to tell you about what happened here. But let's go in and get oriented, and I think then when I tell you about things later, and I'm not going to bore you with an hour-long lecture. I'm going to talk for 10 minutes when we get back out here. And then we're going to have a chance to go around, you get some photo opportunities, look at some of the monuments and statues. But I want to make sure you get an education while you're here. You'll appreciate it that much more as the years go by. That, yeah, I was in Lexington, and I kind of now understand. In 1773, the Bostonians did something highly illegal, speaking of law and crime and punishment, that the British were more angry about than the deaths that occurred as a result of a thing called the Boston Massacre back in 1770. What was more of a concern to the British? Human life or private property? Property. You got it. And what private property was destroyed by Bostonians in December of 1773? Tea. Now, England's angry, so they passed a series of laws meant to punish Boston, mainly. They shut the port of Boston, they taxed them even more, etc., etc., etc. And so tensions are running high. These acts that the British passed were called the coercive acts, to force Boston to heed to the law. However, the Americans thought these acts were so intolerable, we called those same acts the what acts? Intolerable acts. How many people have heard of the intolerable acts? It's the same thing. They're acts to punish Boston by Parliament. Well, the Americans decide that, you know, things are going from bad to worse here. Maybe we should kind of get together with some of the other colonies, because the 13 colonies needed some kind of cohesion. A lot of the colonists up and down the colonies, like in Virginia and the Carolinas, they're thinking, you know, if it could happen up in Massachusetts, it could happen to us too. So the communication really starts to take place, and they form a thing called the First Continental Congress. That's in 1774, and that's in response to the intolerable acts. Now, the First Continental Congress didn't accomplish anything except one thing. They said, let's meet again in the spring of 1775 if things don't get better. Well, we know what happens in the spring of 1775, this right here. In the meantime, the Americans start training their local militia. They will eventually start training them and call them Minutemen, so they're ready at a minute's notice, but that basically happens after the battle that happens here. As I said, there were really no Minutemen here, they were just militia. They start storing arms, and where they start storing arms is 15 miles outside of Boston in a place called Concord. 2 miles from here, we're going to be going out there. That is the British goal. On the night of April 18th, actually during the afternoon of April 18th, and George knows about this because he's the one that pointed out to me the last time we were here, thank you very much, George, my right-hand man. There's a place called the Green Dragon Tavern. We'll see it when we walk the Freedom Trail tomorrow, or on Saturday in Boston. At the Green Tavern, there were American spies listening to British officers as they're drinking. Of course, their mouths are opening up, and they're talking about how they're going to send British troops out here sometime in April to seize the American weapons that they're storing out here. The Americans are storing these weapons in case there's more trouble. The Americans hear about this, of course, with their spies. I think their little kids were in the tavern hearing this, and they told some of the American leaders, such as Dr. Joseph Warren, whose biography is online for you in D2L or in the book that we have. I'd like you to read about him. Interesting guy. We'll see him again when we get to Bunker Hill on Saturday. The Americans now are starting to think, okay, the British are going to go out there and take those weapons. We better be ready. And so they are ready on the night of April 18th, 1775. But they aren't sure if the British are going to march through the neck of Boston, which was like a big peninsula at the time. It's since been filled in, and march out here to Concord, or if they're going to come across the Charles Harbor on boats. And so they put a watchman up in the tower of Old North Church. We'll be going there, and you'll be able to, I don't know if you can go right up in the tower, but this is where he stood, and he was given the instructions that if you get word that the British are coming by land, marching down the neck of Boston, then hold up one lantern so they can be seen across the Charles Harbor, because we'll have riders over there. And one of the riders, not the only rider, there were dozens of them, one of them was a guy by the name of Paul Revere. Well, he ends up holding up 2 lanterns, which meant that, the British are going by sea. Now, where did the British start that day? They started in Boston Common. We're going to see that probably tomorrow, and we'll see it definitely on Saturday, because that's where we start the Freedom Trail Tour. The British think that they're going to sneak out here to Concord, 15 miles away. The Americans know all about it. The word is being spread. Paul Revere himself gets arrested at least twice that night by the British. He doesn't even make it all the way to Concord to warn the Americans. Another fellow by the name of William Dawes makes it even further than Paul Revere, but he also gets arrested. The guy that really deserves the credit is a 22-year-old doctor, believe it or not, a doctor at 22, by the name of William Prescott. He had been out on a hot date with his girlfriend out in Concord. He's coming back later that night after this hot date. He runs into some of the American messengers. He says, I'll help out. And he's the only one that really completed the ride. But they start warning the Americans throughout. Now, the British get off the boats across the harbor. It takes them a long time. It's a mess. The British don't know what they're doing, getting in these boats. They have to make 2 or 3 trips. They drop them off in land that's swampland. The British soldiers are angry, and now they've got to march 15 miles out to Concord. Rumor is that they're coming, so the Americans now meet out here in the green in the dark. But no British. And so what do? They dismiss, and they go over here to Buckman Tavern, and as we said, they spend the night drinking. Some of the men will go to their homes, which are right around the green here. Now, I should have mentioned you, a green in New England is like basically the center of town. It's like in Gettysburg, we have the circle, the square there. In Gettysburg, this is kind of the same thing, except it's much larger. But the houses of some of these guys that are going to get killed here are right around the green, and the wives and the children are watching this action, because the British show up about 4:30 in the morning. The Americans now know the British are just outside of town, moving in that direction. They come rushing out of the tavern, out of the homes, and about 70 Americans meet out here in the green. There are 700 British on their way. 300 of them are going to head over here to the green to see what's going on, because they can hear the drum roll of the Americans. This is 5 o'clock in the morning. Now here in this far east, at 5 o'clock in the morning, it's dawn. It's daylight, but it's just starting. The British show up, and these are highly trained soldiers. Here we have Americans, basically farmers, citizen soldiers, not trained at all, and they don't know what to do, because you've got 70 Americans facing 300 highly trained British. Right out here. At some point, somebody fired a shot. Nobody knows who. I was mentioning that there's a suspicion by some historians it could have been John Hancock or Sam Adams hiding behind a building someplace.
It might even be true, because just because he writes in his journal that he heard the shot from far away doesn't mean that he wasn't here.
Right. Sam Adams had a vested interest in getting something started.
Well, and Sam Adams, give a little background about Sam Adams. He was a creative character a little bit himself, wasn't he?
Oh yeah, he was one of my kids. I have his bobblehead at home. That's how much I like Sam Adams.
So tell them about Sam Adams.
Sam Adams was like the perpetual graduate student, a brilliant guy, but he never could hold down a job. At one time, he had collected taxes from the British. You know what he used to do with the taxes when he collected them? Put them in his pocket, go out later that day and drink and spend the money. Of course, he will get arrested by the British for embezzlement. He's going to go to prison until an American steps in, the richest man in America, a guy by the name of John Hancock, and says, I like something about this guy Adams and the way he thinks. And so Hancock will provide the money for Adams' dream team to get out of, and he gets his lawyers, and he gets out of trouble. From that point on, they become the odd couple, but best of buddies, and they are the real instigators and beginners of the American Revolution, and they're largely forgotten. Mostly Sam Adams. And Sam Adams, by the way, was not a brewer. He did not brew beer. He inherited a brewery from his father, and as I told you, he was kind of an incompetent at almost everything except propaganda. He immediately ran that brewery into the ground. So Sam Adams was a big failure. But when I say he was like a perpetual graduate student, you guys don't know this going to a community college, but when I was an undergraduate, you probably saw it also, there were professors walking around, I thought. I found out later on, no, these were just grad students who were like 40, 50, 60 years old and never left college. And that was kind of like Sam Adams, just this frumpy, intelligent guy. But he found out when the problems started occurring between the British and the Americans that he's really good at propaganda. and people like to listen to what he had to say. He will actually start up an organization of young men, teenage boys, called the Sons of Bitches. Liberty. Sons of Liberty, right. Sons of Liberty. They will become Sons of Bitches in Liberty. So Sam Adams is a big leader, so is John Hancock. And they were actually here the night before what happened out here in hiding. And, you know, we don't know if they left or if they fired the first shot or whatever. So I'll just throw that out for you. But anyway, about 5 o'clock in the morning, they're standing out here, 70 Americans, and there are going to be 300 British standing here. And at this point, I will just read you some of the excerpts so you get the exact. The first British troops to reach Lexington were an advance guard of light infantry under the command of Major Pitcairn. They approached Lexington at sunrise at 5 a.m. The same time Paul Revere was helping to hide Hancock's trunk. So Hancock did get out of town. A group of about 80 Lexington militiamen, I said 70, under the command of Captain Parker, a veteran of the French and Indian War, waited for the British to arrive. Parker understood that the militiamen were overmatched and decided not to try to detain the British. So they're standing out here.
You're just going to let them go?
The militia would, however, make a showing and then let the British pass. So it was saber rattling, basically. When the advance guard of British arrived, a British lieutenant called out for the militia to disperse, and according to some reports, you may have heard this, he said, "Lay down your arms, you damned rebels." So we don't know if that's historically accurate or not, but it's become part of the myth. Parker, the American, instead told his men to disperse and go home. But some may not have heard him, and they left slowly, but they all held on to their weapons. So the British now, these young men, these British soldiers, many of them teenagers, they're scared too, even though they're trained, and they've got their fingers on their triggers. Nobody knows who fired the first shot, as neither Parker nor Pitcairn ordered their men to fire, but a shot was heard. That shot changed world history, didn't it? I contend that was the shot that was heard around the world. They out at Concord, they want to say the first shot fired at Concord Bridge, but this happened earlier in the day. Under duress, the British commander, Colonel Smith, who was not here, finally managed to restore order when he got here. He permitted the British troops to fire a victory volley and then march to Concord. And he sent a message back to Boston saying, we're going to need some reinforcements. Boy, are the British ever going to need reinforcements, because you're going to find out when we get to Concord Bridge a little later after we go to Minuteman Park what happened. But it takes the British about 2 hours now after the skirmish here to get to Concord. What happened here? 8 Americans will lie dead right out here. Another 10 are wounded. One British soldier gets a slight wound in his hand, another British soldier gets shot, a teenage boy gets shot in the thigh. It's not life-threatening. And that's the first battle of the American Revolution.
From the presentations, when they're out there on the other side of the bridge, they look to where we just went through downtown, and they think that the British have started the town on fire. And indeed, there were some fires, and that got the Americans angry.
Yeah, they're pissed.
And there's the real big fighting is here, but the biggest fighting is back there at Miriam's Corner back there, where the fork in the road, we passed that a mile or two back. And then fighting, of course, all the way back to Boston. But this is the famous Old North Bridge. If you get a chance, get online tonight and just type in Yahoo or something images for Old North Bridge, and you'll see what it looks like. What it looked like back then with artist renderings, and what it looks like today a little bit better.
Okay, so we are sitting at the Yahoo coffee place, Yahoo restaurant something. Stacy, what was it?
Yahoo coffee bar.
Coffee bar. After walking for I don't know how many hours it was so far. Like, yeah. And then we have a ghost tour. Is it a ghost tour? A witch tour to go to later. I'm really tired of coffee.
The question is, which witch is which?
Which is which? That's always the question. Tell me.
Be amazed at actually how famous this building truly is. Now there's a number of different reasons for its fame. Sorry, wetting the whistle. Some of them are actually literary reasons. One of them, this building is called the Grimshaw House, from a short story written by Nathaniel Hawthorne, published after his death, called The Tales of Dr. Grimshaw. This is the actual building he references in his story. The Tales of Dr. Grimshaw is said to be one of those cautionary tales. Be careful of what you ask for in life. Y'all might get it. Now, historically, the house's other name is the Peabody House. Sophia Peabody, Hawthorne's wife-to-be, and her sisters live in this house. One of the younger sisters will go on to marry a gentleman by the name of Horace Mann and then start the first kindergarten in America in the 1800s. Hawthorne himself famously claimed to see a ghost here, entering somewhat appropriately from the cemetery side wall, walking across the room in front of him, and then disappearing into a fireplace. Oh, by the way, for the record, that's the oldest cemetery in Salem right there. Now, another author writes about this house. This year actually celebrates the 125-year anniversary of this author's birth. He is a gentleman by the name of Howard Phillips Lovecraft.
Yes.
H.P. Lovecraft writes the short story, The Unnameable, based upon this house, describing a cold October day, icy winds blowing past the Gothic crypts, that's what those big blocky square things are, towards the desolate old house. Much of the inspiration for Lovecraft's haunted city of Arkham, not to be confused with the Batman city of Arkham, is actually Salem and its environs. There really was a quote-unquote Arkham Asylum. It was the Danville State Mental Hospital. And this place had a couple of double whammies to boot, because it was built on the site where the hanging judge of the witch trials, John Hathorne, had his mansion. Apparently somebody deemed it appropriate to pile all that bad karma up in one space where we could keep our eyes on it. And so creepy was this place that they also, after it closed, filmed a horror movie there in the 90s called Session 9. Now, during the Great Fire of 1914, the industrial waterfront of Salem is being devastated. This building was actually damaged. It was rebuilt to this configuration, which actually beggars the question, if it's this bloody creepy now, what did it look like when Lovecraft saw it? I'm just saying. Now, the building is in fact currently unoccupied. There are lights on. Not as many as there were a couple of nights ago. The last gentleman, very, very elderly man in his 90s who lived here, we believe has passed away. His bedroom was in the second floor up there, and there is still the stair climber attached to the stairs. Believe it or not, this is not a tenement. This is all one big house. We have heard, though, that somebody did have an intention for this place. It has been placed on the market several times, usually very expensively. They wanted to turn it into a bed and breakfast. Yeah, I know. Think about it. Well, it's a quiet neighborhood.
Sure.
They're not dying to get in here anymore.
No.
Yeah, I went there.
Be quiet.
Not at Halloween, it won't. The only place I know of that puts floodlights up in the cemeteries. Now, somebody did make a very valid point, though, that only in two cities does this make a lot of sense. One of them being Salem, the other one, a famous city of hauntings and magic. I heard somebody whispering something.
Gettysburg.
Gettysburg is a good place for hauntings. Not so sure about the magic. But this is a little further south.
New Orleans.
Bingo! I heard a lot of New Orleans. You're on the money. Yeah, think about it. Although some young lad last year was very, very amusing and said Disney.
There's a lot of magic there.
Yeah. And it'll haunt you to this day. Well, it'll haunt your pocketbook anyways. Hey now. And the weird things don't happen in the past. Oh no. This time last year we came up the hill and there was a TV truck there doing a location shot. Well, apparently this young man had decided to get in touch with his past. They arrested this gentleman in the cemetery during the day trying to dig up a grave in broad daylight in front of about 45 different witnesses. When he was arraigned, his lawyer claimed that, oh yes, the young man in fact found the hole like that and was trying to fill it in. Stick with that story. It might get you somewhere, other than the 90 days of psychiatric evaluation that he in fact did get.
But he didn't get in jail.
I still don't know how that turned out yet. I think they kind of hoped that everybody would forget it.
Yeah.
I didn't do it tonight, but I felt it was a safe night. Usually I'll tap on the wall with my cane. The reason why is one night I came here, told all the ghost stories. Somebody came up to me after the story and said, by the way, I don't know if you were aware, but while you were leaning against that wall, there's a skunk sitting back there. He never twitched, which to me tells me that he likes a good ghost story. That's my story and I'm sticking to it.
I was going to say you didn't stink that night.
No. That was a good one. I like it. See, this is what I like when the people work with you. Now, this is the Pickman House. This is one of those places that you really can't make up. Built in the 1650s, said to be marked by tragedy through most of its existence, at least while it was occupied. Young girl claimed by illness early on in its history. The thing that sets the tragedy off is the house should have been quarantined when the girl got ill. The family was hearing nothing of it. No, they quarantined the poor daughter in the attic. Fed her through a trap door. Of course, medical science being what it was in those days, this doesn't have a happy ending. The family was heartbroken, they say, and moved away in great haste. I don't think it was heartbreak that drove them out of here. Because once the place was empty, it was never quiet again. Strange noises of all hours, day or night, strange lights at night. One of the sheriff's men, investigating what he saw to be a light floating in the window, gets a broken arm for his troubles. Oh, the light was floating. They hadn't finished the floor in that corner of the house yet. He fell through and broke his arm. Another case here is a murder of a young woman. It was a husband and wife that lived here. A craftsman was the husband. He's going to have a workshop. He's going to make goods for the family, add income to themselves. And this is an honorable thing, but Salem is full of wonderful ideas on the surface that go south pretty much soon afterwards. Primarily because he put the workshop in the attic. Tools were moving around, things were disappearing, then he starts to hear voices. The voices led to madness and then to murder. They say he murdered his young wife with a kettle of boiling wax from the workshop, then took his own life by hanging. Once again, we have an empty house that is not quiet. The hauntings begin to accelerate in pitch with every disaster that happens, till finally the neighbors are being driven away. Spooked away, literally. Now comes the museum. They take possession of this beautiful example of colonial architecture. What's their brilliant idea? We're gonna hold a tour. Keep them coming, boys. The person who gets the receiving end of this one is the caretaker. He was hired to lead tourists through the daylight. At night, he's supposed to maintain the place. That was the plan, except he was frightened out of here the first night he ever worked here. He says the noises he heard after sunset were so horrifying, there was not enough money in the world to make him come back here after dark again. And he only ever worked here in daylight again. Then somebody came to their senses, closed the building to the public. It's a research wing for the museum. But all sorts of things happen here. Sometimes pictures don't always work. Cameras don't always work. Sometimes you can't get them to focus on the building. Sometimes they won't snap the picture, and sometimes they just go bloody dead. There's a lot of strange energy here. People have claimed on at least one tour to have seen a face in the third floor window. Sometimes you get pictures of faces in this window. Just curious. 9 times out of 10 they begin explained as reflections. The 10th one, not so much. And ghost radar. Yeah, they got an app for that. And usually on several occasions someone has trotted one out and been rewarded with anywhere from 1 to goodness knows how many pings from inside the house. Which is why they say the Pickman house is one of the most haunted places here in Salem. Now we're going to duck into the memorial quick because I'm going to show you where the hanging judge of the witch trials, John Hathorne, is buried.
Can I ask a question?
Hopefully I have an answer for you.
Has any paranormal investigators been to this house?
We don't think so. The problem is the museum takes a dim view on the more spectacular history of Salem.
So they wouldn't want to clear the house by...
No, they would.
They'd rather just leave it go and
they'd probably
stay silent.
they just their 3 biggest pet peeves in Salem are ghost tours, witch shops, and haunted houses, in no particular order.
Thank you.
They were a much more colorful place before they built the new wing. In fact, I'll explain some of that color very shortly. As I said, this is the Witch Trial Memorial, dedicated on the 300-year anniversary of the trials, rededicated in 2012, which was the 320-year anniversary. There are 20 benches around the walls here, dedicated to the main victims of the trials. There were actually a couple of different ideas for a memorial. One was, in fact, a traditional statue. We were talking about the Bewitched statue. There was actually a traditional witch memorial statue. I actually contributed to having it originally started up, I want to say back in the 80s. They did finally cast the statue. I believe it's inside the Wax Museum there. The other one they have a model of at the Visitor Center. One look at it tells you why they didn't choose it. There's a gallows. Now there are 19 benches for the men and women accused. Yes, men can be charged with witches. In fact, that particular bench, George Burroughs was a minister in those days. They actually went up as far as Wells, Maine, which in those days was part of Massachusetts colony, and dragged him down here to convict him. One of the more colorful instances, they claimed that a witch could not recite the Lord's Prayer. The devil would make him trip up. On the gallows ladder, George Burroughs recited the Lord's Prayer perfectly. Perfect grammar, perfect diction. Yes, they hanged him anyways. And of course, we have the bench for Giles Corey. Here's one of those cases. His is under the light. His is the largest and heaviest bench in them all. Just the thing for the man pressed under heavy stones. Now the reason why the memorial is sited here, and the reason why it opens up to see the cemetery at the end, people from the witch trials are buried here. Specifically, the white stone that's out there, the square one. That is the burial site of one Justice John Hathorne of the Court of Oya and Termina to see and determine the witch trial court. This is not a nice man. This is the man they call a hanging judge. His biggest complaint was they wouldn't let him hang witches fast enough. Oh, and he didn't stop there. After the trials, there was a lot of soul searching, a lot of recriminations, a lot of finger pointing. They wanted to see the villains of the piece pay. None of the girls were ever held very accountable, but the one person they wanted was Sheriff Corwin, because he'd been pocketing the proceeds of torturing and murdering, basically, his neighbors throughout the entirety of 1692. They could not prosecute him because the man protecting him, John Hathorne, is one of his uncles. This is how he was getting away with murder, literally. Now, Hathorne's got backup. He's got the best backup politics can buy. The man backing up Hathorne, the Lieutenant Governor and Chief Justice of Massachusetts Bay Colony, William Stoughton. And his whole purpose in being here during 1692? He was supposed to keep the Puritans from getting out of control with that witch trial business. Yeah, you see how that worked out. He was egging them on. He was willing to hang people on the basis of spectral evidence alone, never mind the trial. So the two of them used their political power to make sure that Corwin could never be held accountable. Well, in this they succeeded. Pity they couldn't do nothing about that curse business. Now this is also the great-great-grandfather of Nathaniel Hawthorne. Notice the difference, Hathorne and Hawthorne, not just tomatoes, tomatoes. Hawthorne made a very impassioned plea to the courts to change his name because he said this man left a black mark on his reputation. In fact, he said this man left a black mark wherever he went. If you dug up the body, he would probably have stained the ground black. The courts allowed him to change the name. Now further back, about 100 yards, there's a very small headstone. Embarrassingly, a week ago, I couldn't find it. I swear I think they moved that bloody thing. But it's the burial stone for Mary Corey, Giles' second wife, the one with the problem with the stairs. They call the ghost that they say that she is the Lady in Black. They say she's looking for Giles. And in fact, the place I usually tell the story from is where Giles, during the daytime anyways, when we are allowed in the cemetery, is where Giles is supposed to be buried. He is not here, nor are any of the victims of the witch trials. They were deemed unworthy of Christian burial by the witch trial court. The truly fortunate were taken home to their family farms, such as Rebecca Nurse, who was on her farm, bless you, in Danvers, which was once Salem Village. Giles and his last wife, Martha, are supposed to be somewhere near the edge of their mill pond in what was once Salem Farms, now the town of West Peabody. The irony is, the only one legally able to be buried here of all those victims was Giles Corey. Remember the circumstances of his death. He was not tried and convicted. That was what that unfortunate torture was about. Although, in their infinite wisdom, some of the witch trial court deemed his death by torture, no, I'm not making this up, suicide. Well, he asked for more weight. I guess that was their reasoning. Now, this is what the oldest cemetery in Salem. There is said to be a lot of paranormal activity, mostly involving the back corner. Some of it is said to have spilled out, sometimes to the Wax Museum, sometimes to the Murphy's Tavern. There's also said to be a lot of magical energy here. And according to some of them, the tree in the back corner, just behind this big one here, is said to be one of the sources of magical energy in Salem. One of the names I've heard given for it is the Mother Tree. The reason why they claim this tree is supposed to be older than Salem, well over 300 years. At times they say you would find offering bags tossed up into the branches during the ceremonies at, say, May Eve, summer solstice. And according to a couple of my friends who are Salem witches, they actually thanked me one night because they said, you are probably the only guide we've ever heard who actually was taught the right part of this story. So apparently I had the right teachers. But the other tree we like to have a little fun with is directly behind me, silhouetted against the gas station. This one isn't as fancy as the Mother Tree. This is the Lightning Tree. As you might have guessed, this tree and its environs takes a lot of lightning strikes. In fact, the back part of the tree, which you can't see from here, isn't there. Blown to splinters by lightning strikes. Why does this tree attract such unwanted attention from the gods? Well, it's the headstone at the foot of the tree, belonging to a young man by the name of Caleb Pickman. Yes, there is a good possibility that he was related to the people in that house. And if so, his luck was running true to form, because he was struck by lightning on his sailing ship in the harbor. His headstone is on the foot of the tree, and it says, as it faces the tree, killed by lightning. And every 29 years, the tree is said to take another hit. That's about the same amount of time that Caleb was alive. So you can understand why they tucked him in a corner by himself. He's a bloody menace even in the afterlife. Unless the sky is very clear and very bright, I tend to avoid that corner, because on at least 2 separate occasions I have told this story from here, and we have been rewarded with the rumble of thunder from the back of the cemetery. Yes, I do attract that kind of luck. So we're going to head back to the main shop. Oh, I will tell you for the record that on several occasions I see people taking pictures. Hathorn stone has turned up with strange things around it. So if you've taken pictures, that's a good one to get. At least one lady ran after me after the tour was over one night to show me the picture of the mist that she got around the stone. So we're going to go back to the store to talk about a famous haunting, a famous murder, and the most famous pirate in history, and his connections to Salem. A 6-foot demon was standing behind him with a sword. Till he turned around. Don't worry, he wasn't a little kid. I wouldn't do that to a little child. He was about 14. He might live to be 15. He was rather surprised. He was just like, "Arr." His mother was in hysterics, and my attitude was, God, I love my job. I didn't even have to make a noise. I just stood there, very, very quietly. Okay, back at the beginning. Hang the lantern in the window, Mom. We might not be home till dark. Okay, we'll just leave that there. It's too new, I don't want to break it. Now, we're at the site of our last stop, the Gardner Pingree House, also known as the Clue House. Now, the Parker brothers, as we heard earlier, they're pretty good taking advantage of other people's games. Monopoly they bought from that gentleman down near Philadelphia. Risk was actually originally from France. The Ouija board, I'm not sure I want to know. Clue was a British game called Cluedo. There was a cultural exchange, if you will. They got to manufacture Monopoly, which was our top parlor game. We got Cluedo. There was much rejoicing. Yeah. Thank you. We shortened Cluedo to Clue, and the names were changed a little bit. The reason why the Parkers were inspired was the murder that takes place here in 1830. We just passed the 185-year anniversary of the death of a Captain Joseph White in that very bedroom on the 2nd floor. A little bit about White. He was a wealthy merchant and ship owner. Amount of good things to say about White. Because Captain Joseph White was in fact never mind.
Girls go around the outside.
Captain Joseph White was a slave trader. And I'm thinking of somebody he should have sold into slavery right now. No. Yeah, slavery had been outlawed in Massachusetts in the late 1780s, as had been the carrying of human cargo through the port of Salem. It is a pretty much open but dirty secret that many of the most famous merchant families did carry slaves. White was different in the fact that he boasted of it. He also treats his family horribly. His last living relative, his grandniece Mary Beckford, was exiled, disowned, penniless, because she married one of his ship captains, a man by the name of Joseph Knapp, and for good measure he fires Knapp. April 6, 1830, the captain's manservant goes upstairs to the bedroom to rouse the captain. He didn't wake at his usual time. He will not rise again. He's been clubbed over the head with a blunt object, then stabbed repeatedly through the chest with so much violence that several of his bones were shattered. There is no motive for this crime. Though he was far from the angel that the newspapers eulogized him as, nobody could come up with a reason for such sheer brutality. It wasn't robbery. At the foot of the captain's bed, a large iron-bound sea chest filled with gold coin. Also the captain's personal papers. The chest was unlocked and apparently, as far as anybody could tell, untouched. They formed the Committee of Vigilance to investigate this crime. It's about a dozen people who are sworn to secrecy and who are paid a lot of money, $1,000 per person, which in those days is a great sum. They're turned loose to investigate. They begin to bring in suspects. 2 of them are brothers named Knapp. They also arrest 2 of their friends from across the harbor in Marblehead. But the 2 important people they grab are brothers Richard and George Crowninshield. The Crowninshields are Salem's most wealthy and politically influential merchant family. They're also the family that brings in the drunken elephant. Richard and George are gangsters. Richard is likened to being a kind of criminal like, pretty much like Whitey Bulger. He's not afraid to get his hands bloody. Criminal enterprise along the waterfront, smuggling. He knows where the hidden tunnels around here are, gambling halls, brothels. He is in fact the most hated and despised man in all of Salem. Women, however, adore the man. He's tall and handsome. He treats them like royalty. He spends lavishly. The only human being it's said that he actually cares for, his younger brother George, who he protects from punishments to the exclusion of all else. They're all locked in the Salem jail. The grand jury comes in. 5 minutes later, the grand jury goes home. There's no evidence. There are no witnesses. The 2 friends of the Knapps were released. It should have ended there. But a lot of people wanted to see Richard hanged for this crime. Not the least of which because the political scandal, the scandal alone could break the family's hold on politics, which in those days was pretty much ironclad. Now, if you look hard enough for something to connect somebody to something in a wrong way, it tends to turn up, whether it's really there or not. That could be the case with Richard. Then again, the evidence could have been legit. But either way, Richard knows the jig is up. He knows that his life is probably going to end soon. He's going to protect George this last time. He studied the law. By the laws of the day, if Richard cannot be tried and convicted as the principal in first-degree murder, George can't be prosecuted as one of its accomplices. To take himself out of the picture, he will hang himself from the bars of his cell in Old Salem jail, leaving a poem to George and a letter that accepts responsibility for the crime, not to say a confession, which will stop the wheels of justice for 5 seconds. They want somebody so bad they bring in a ringer. The man they bring in is Daniel Webster, who at this point in his career was a very famous defense attorney. He goes on to become one of our greatest statesmen. Why would you bring in a defense attorney to prosecute? Because he's the best at what he does, and he likes big showy crimes. And if they didn't hire him, pretty much sure the Crowninshields would have. Now he's also a bit of a drinker and a gambler. They pay off all his debts. They give him $1,000. It seems to be the going rate. He's so good at what he does, he manages, without witnesses or evidence, to convict both Knapp brothers of first-degree murder. They'll be hanged at Old Salem jail. And the summation of his trials is so methodical and precise and chilling, they say, that a young reporter uses what he hears as the inspiration for the most famous horror story in the world, The Telltale Heart. The young reporter, a young Edgar Allan Poe. He and Webster both covered, Hawthorne both covered this case for the press. Something happened because they never got along again. Now, Webster would try to do the same thing to George Crowninshield. Oh no, he won't. Richard may have been the most hated person in town. Everybody came to George's defense, from the politicians, to the merchants, to the guy in the corner, to the 2 young ladies who worked at one of the night locations of the Crowninshields, all of whom who claimed that George was not the murderer, in some cases were rather occupied that night, if you will. That was their stories, they stuck to them, and they acquitted George of murder. He returns to his home and dies of old age. Now come the ghosts. They require a trigger. Here's another one of those ideas that sounded really good on the surface, but was not really thought through. The trigger is the house to the right of the Gardner Pingree house. Its original home was behind the hotel. They were going to destroy it to build a parking lot. But this is the start of the preservation craze. It's a famous house. So we'll move it. They move it to sit next door to the Gardner Pingree house. Why does this trigger the ghosts? The Crowninshield house, where George died. Yeah, they should have thought this one through better. Those ghosts that were quiet up till now, They make up for vengeance, for lost time with a vengeance. Pun intended. One ghost chases the other through both properties with so much force that when they get going, they're supposed to knock furniture aside, knock things off the mantels and shelves, knock portraits off the walls, and for good measure, there's stories of heart attacks after watching the ghosts. Now from the portraits, well, we figured out who they are. It's said that one of them is Captain Joseph White. He's doing the chasing. Who's he chasing? It's not Richard. It's not the Naps. They say he's got George Crowninshield in his sights. Did George do it? Remember, Richard's letter only accepted responsibility for the crime. Now, Richard may have known what his brother did. Then again, the captain may be chasing the only Crowninshield he can in fact find. Either way, he hunts him to this day. And the motive for this crime? The Knapp brothers never forgave what Captain White did to their father. So they cooked up supposedly a scheme with the Crowninshields. Captain White dies without his will. That money goes all to his last blood relative, their new aunt, Mary Beckford. So 3 days before the murder, one of the Knapp brothers is at a dinner party in the house, Joseph Jr., and he goes upstairs when nobody is looking to the captain's bedroom. From the sea chest he nicks the will. Perfect plan. It already failed. 5 days before the murder, the captain felt so unwell that he decided to make sure all his affairs were in order. So he took a little trip to his lawyer's office downtown, and in front of witnesses, he drafted a new will. When Joe Jr. was upstairs with his hand in the cookie jar, he should have helped himself to the gold, because the captain left the will with the lawyer. He stole the wrong paper. It was a gamble that was big, and unfortunately in the end they paid the ultimate price. And ladies and gentlemen, with that our last story, I bid you all thank you for accompanying me on the Salem Night Tour. And there was in fact much rejoicing. Yay! Thank you guys very, very much. I know.